new feature from Zoom. So welcome everybody to this activation. I'll introduce myself. My name is Lisette Sutherland. I am an American living in the Netherlands, and I run a company called Collaboration Superpowers. And we help people work better together remotely through various online resources like podcasts and handouts and things that help people, but also the bread and butter of our operation is the Work Together Anywhere workshop. And we give workshops all over the world. I have 70 plus licensed trainers right now giving workshops all over the world. So that's basically how we help people work better remote. And Evan, over to you for an introduction.
Oh, thanks so much. Nice to meet you. I'm an American in America, wishing I lived in the Netherlands. What an amazing, wonderful, beautiful country. I always enjoy my trips to the Netherlands and The Hague in particular. And my background is 30 years of enterprise tech and business development and marketing. And I'm a kind of tech fluencer, working with clients to help them blow up their digital social presence and drive engagement. And I have a particular interest in the future of work and remote work and collaboration and cloud and related topics. So really excited to meet you today and to chat.
Yeah, I've been wanting to talk with you for years, so this is a real treat today.
Oh, likewise, likewise. So what's on your mind? What's top of mind for you these days as we head towards some kind of emergence from this pandemic?
Well, I think what is very clear, what we saw in 2020, was that people who doubted whether remote working was possible saw that when necessary, it was possible to work together anywhere. So I think that there's a lot of managers and leaders out there who are very against it before, or maybe hesitant. I wouldn't necessarily say against, but very hesitant to move to a more remote model. And I think those people are now seeing that it is actually not anything to be afraid of. It just takes some planning and coordination. So now, in terms of future of work, what I think we're clearly seeing is not everybody wants to go back to the office, even when it's safe to do so. So I'm saying to people, the future of work is choice. It's choice for the individual, and it's choice for the company to decide how remote they want to be, right? Because depending on how remote you want to go, you're going to need different systems, tools, and processes to be put in place in order to work in that way. So I think right now there's a lot of decision making going on between individuals and companies on how remote does everybody want to be individually and company wise. What are you seeing?
Oh, I would totally agree with everything you just said. I'd also just add the element of technology. I mean, what an amazing enabler technology has been, from the core of the network delivering broadband and wireless services in a reliable way to applications to enable secure remote working over encrypted networks, to collaboration tools, which have seen an explosion of usage and investment, to video conferencing, and on and on. So, it's almost several decades in the making of these tools and platforms and technologies that have come together in such a meaningful way, to the point where we can have a conversation like this and feel pretty connected from the Netherlands to my location here in Boston. So I'm a techie at heart. I'm a geek. So this has been kind of almost the one of the highlights of my tech career, is seeing the cloud and connectivity and security come together to enable these remote workers. And now companies are doubling down on the investment in tech to enable this new world of remote work, to make it more seamless and easy and transparent for those remote workers. So in the midst of this terrible pandemic, we've seen tech really rise to the rescue in many ways. And I think many workers are embracing it to the point where, hey, they're realizing I can be productive and connected and engaged from my home or from anywhere. And I don't necessarily have to get into the office to access, the file cabinet or my desk drawer or some asset or people to get work done. So that's been a real revelation rather, for me to kind of watch unfold.
So why do you think people, I mean, there's some famous examples out there of like Goldman Sachs and people, Netflix, some CEOs that really want people to come 100% back to the office. What do you think is driving that after having seen that it's possible?
Well, there are many cultures where close knit collaboration side by side is fundamental to what they're doing. I mean, if you think of one of my favorite technologists, thought leaders, visionaries, Steve Jobs. I mean, what he did at Pixar, for example, is little known work at Pixar between stints at Apple. That required a very tight knit, close knit community of creators working side by side to get things done. And so there are environments where working side by side is an important component, and that human connection is important. But there are equally as many roles where, if you're an accountant looking at numbers and spreadsheets, that kind of close knit collaboration side by side isn't required. So there's just this vast landscape of companies and roles and jobs, and there is no kind of cookie cutter solution to all of those folks. And I think what's now required is this flexibility and resilience and adaptability, both in terms of working styles, management styles, as you alluded to, and people adapting to what people need versus what we traditionally a company might have done.
Yeah, indeed. And I'm seeing on Twitter too, the hashtag the great resignation is popping up more and more because right now there's a lot of workers that are being forced to come back to the office. And they're saying, actually, no, I don't want to come back. And in fact, I will look for another job before I come back. So that's been sort of an interesting development. But indeed, it's kind of up to the company and up to the individual to decide where on the spectrum that they want to fall, because some things are way better in person. Do you think that there is software that can, technology that can replicate that brainstorming, some of the stuff you're talking about like needing to be together? Do you think and any of that can be replicated with software?
I think it's hard to replicate it exactly, but given the new distributed style of working, I think you can be very efficient and productive in a hybrid model. So it seems to me, and I'd be interested in your thoughts, the hybrid model where there's some time in the office and there's some time at home in a very productive fashion, and there's this marrying of the two seems to be what people are settling on. What do you think, Lisette, about hybrid work as kind of the future?
It seems to be like the clear future at the moment. However, I say that without with knowing that people haven't really tried it yet. And if done without any planning or preparation, hybrid can be just downright horrible, right? There's some people that are missing out on things. Hybrid meetings are particularly challenging to run and facilitate. I mean, you have to have some really good technology to make remote participants feel like they are part of the conversation in those situations. So I feel like, yeah, everybody's like, yeah, freedom. We love our freedom. We want to work when and where we're most productive. And hybrid is going to be extremely challenging to get right, is sort of where I see that. So I hope there's no,
So I'd be
what I'm hoping
interested
is that
in
there's
the
not a
workshops
backlash.
that the workshops you do and the consulting work you do. What are some of the best practices that you're seeing in terms of hybrid work and how to make it work, pun intended?
I would say the number one thing that I always recommend to all my workshop participants or clients is one, create a team agreement together and just define how you're going to work together. So for instance, like what information are you going to share? Where is it located? How is it going to be organized? Are there security protocols that people need to pay attention to? I think that's something I'd love to talk with you about is like how do we make sure that we're working in a way that where information and data is secure when we're all everywhere, from home, from co-working spaces, from coffee shops, this kind of thing. So there's the information component. How are we going to communicate together? Like what tools are we going to use? If the boss sends an email on the weekend, does that mean we have to answer it? Like working hours and all of these things starting to need to be defined. And then how do we know what each other are doing? like what's being worked on, how do we organize our workflows and our tasks together. And then the last thing I've added to my team agreement after 2020 was well-being, right? Because we saw that everybody was productive in 2020. It seems for most companies, almost everybody that I talked to, productivity was not the issue. Burnout has become sort of the thing that people are contacting me most about. And it's because we have those blended work-life boundaries. And, we're going like, okay, it's 8 p.m. I'm going to just check email real quick. And then 2 hours later, we're still dealing with something that came in on the inbox. So one of the best practices that I always put in place for people is just create an agreement together for how you're going to work together. So that would be best practice number one. The next thing I would recommend for people is like evaluate your infrastructure. Like the way you used your office before is not going to be the same way you're going to use it in the future, right? Like it's just the idea of individual offices or cubicles, like it's going to become more of a collaboration space is what I'm guessing, where people come in to actually do things together. And there's of course some people that prefer working in the office. My husband, for example, hates working from home. He was one of the first people back at the office when they opened back up in the Netherlands. He just hates it. He likes to have somewhere to go. He likes to have a different space to go to. It has to be totally separate. So there's people that are going to use the space like that. But then I would also say for your meetings, your infrastructure is going to be critical for getting everybody involved in these mixed meetings. And then the last best practice, and there's of course tons of nuance in all of this, but the last best practice I would put in there is feedback loops. Having regular retrospectives with your team about what's working and what's not working, and then going back and revising your team agreement or the workflow processes that you've put in place. Just recognizing that we're not going to get it right for a while. It's going to take a while to evolve our working practices as this way of working that we're doing evolves. But I'd love to know for you what you're recommending to people about the best practices around hybrid.
Yeah, that's a fascinating tour de force of suggestions. And I'm a solo practitioner of sorts, so I could sort of represent the small business side. And everything has changed with remote working. The way you interface with prospects and clients, the way you uh, deal with suppliers, the way you market your business, with online events. We've had to create these new playbooks, as it were, and you clearly are working with corporations on these playbooks. But I think down at the individual level, we have to reinvent our own personal playbook, and it's tough if you're used to getting up and taking the train and going to work and coming home, and you had a nice regime in place for a decade or two or more. Having to reinvent yourself is not something most people are comfortable with, and uh, people had a lot of time to think, and so that great resignation is real. And I think companies are going to have to connect with their workers, with their employees in much more meaningful ways, and support balance, support their childcare challenges, support flexible working in ways that they really didn't have to think about in the past. And I think a lot of people not just are gonna quit or change jobs, they're gonna change careers. People have realized that, hey, this is not meaningful to me. This is not fulfilling to me. I'm in a rat race of sorts, and I want to get off the hamster wheel, and do something that has more purpose. And companies, to attract talent now, are going to have to cater to those feelings, and it's not comfortable for most employees whose thoughts think that's a function of an HR department or something, as far as meeting their employees' needs, expectations, challenges. So a lot of reinvention to be done there as well. Now, you have an interesting bird's eye view of companies of all sizes around the world, reinventing themselves and their organizations. What are you seeing some companies do, either by name specifically, or if you can't mention the name, maybe just a company XYZ? How are they specifically returning to this new normal?
The number one that I think that I see is a bunch of surveys. So a lot of companies are first starting with surveys to see like how many people want to go back to the office and what's that going to look like. And then most companies that I'm talking to right now have been surprised by the answers on the surveys, which has been showing that about 85% on average across the world, 85% of people don't want to work at the office 100% of the time. They want to work 3 or more days per week from other places, whether it could be co-working, it could be home, whatever it is. So then I think there's this initial shock of like, oh my God, nobody wants to go back to the office. So the other thing that companies are now doing is one, reevaluating office space. So consolidating buildings, I'm seeing that happening all over the place. Everybody's consolidating. There's a bank here in the Netherlands that even before the pandemic, they were closing down various buildings just to save on real estate and then having people move back to a central location. But that central location can't fit everybody all at once. So a certain percentage have to work outside of the office. I'm assuming that's something that we've been seeing over the last 10 years actually, is like new places popping up for people to work. So that would be one thing that I'm seeing people doing. Other things is that this whole well-being component. I think that companies are really starting to take seriously burnout and well-being, especially after the pandemic, because we really have just gone through something. And I think collectively teams are starting to feel that. So well-being programs, putting therapy in place for people, or just making sure that people are taking enough time off, I would say, is another thing that companies are doing. I'm trying to think of specific examples because I have been working with a lot, but mostly, I guess what I'm seeing mostly is companies recognizing that they have to be remote first and that they're going to have to take a remote first approach, which when I define remote first, I'd be interested to hear your definition. When I define it, I usually just mean that you don't have to be remote or flexible, but you've got the systems and processes in place to be able to go remote if you need to. In the past, I was always encouraging companies to be remote first by saying, what if there's bad weather or transportation breaks down or sick children at home? Like I never put a pandemic as an example because it seemed way too extreme. And yet here we are, a very extreme example in terms of remote first. So I think the big thing is there's a shock that so many people want to continue working in this way, even though we just went through we just went through forced remote working. And then there's the shock of working this way. And then there's the sort of recognition that they're going to have to be remote first.
And what do you think, Lizette? How are we going to deal with the issue of equality and fairness when it comes to remote workers? If you're in the office, traditionally you're perceived as maybe one of the guys, or you're there longer, you're seen, you're heard, you're more visible. Even through the pandemic, we've seen women take the brunt of childcare responsibilities and remote working to look after the household and children and education as with school closures. And it looks like men have an easier time getting back into the office for a variety of different reasons. How do you deal with that challenge of perhaps second class citizens who maybe are remote more often than not seen and heard, and maybe not treated equally when it comes to the person in the office who has access to resources, or their manager, or networking opportunities, or other things? That seems to be quite a sticky situation when it comes to the corporate hierarchy.
Yeah. So one of the things that's happened in the pandemic that everybody's noticed is that we have to go from being time-based to being results-based, because how do we know what people are doing or what they're worth? It's what are they delivering? Now, I'm thinking this idea of inequality, it's going to be really horrible for a while, just like hybrid meetings, right? Like the people in the room have a significant advantage over the remote participants. And it's going to be the same, I feel, when going back to the office. The people that are just in the office, and because being in person is so powerful. So there is going to be an advantage. And I think that there's a real onus on leadership to make sure that the playing field stays level between, if you're going to decide to work in this hybrid way, you have to make sure the playing field stays level. So one is being results oriented and really having a clear vision of what success looks like on your team so that everybody understands what success really looks like. And then the other thing I would say is more feedback loops. Again, circling back to like some of the things that we have in place, but like feedback loops on how are we doing as a team. One-on-ones are going to become increasingly important, as like, leaders need to sit down and just talk one-on-one with people, not just in terms of like, how are you doing? Are you accomplishing those things? And then I really do feel like the way that we do performance reviews in general, I mean, everybody has a different system, but in general, most companies have some sort of an annual performance review system in place. And I feel like that when we go remote, that system is somehow going to need to change to be more continuous, so that we don't just get feedback once a year or raises once a year, that we actually get continuous feedback from our colleagues and our leaders. But let me pose the question right back to you, because you have a ton of experience in this. Like, how would you advise people to level the playing field?
Well, I think it's a big wake up call to managers and to business leaders in general. I mean, the old days of management by walking around and kind of schmoozing over coffee have to be over. I mean, that is not a fair and equitable way anymore to engage with employees who might not be at headquarters or at the office. And we always had this divide between the headquarters staff and the person in the Midwest somewhere, and that person was always at a disadvantage. Now multiply that by 10, 20, 50x. And managers have to embrace the technology. They have to embrace video, and they have to embrace social media, and they have to embrace communication tools and writing and posting and live streaming and other ways to engage and reach employees that aren't, a slap on the back or, kind of a quick chit chat in the hallway, because that's not sufficient now in this new world of work. And so really the onus is on the business leaders to set the stage and set the example of how you engage a fully remote workforce. And I think that there's a lot of work to be done there.
Yeah, indeed. And what are some of do you also see changes in the performance reviews or the way that we give feedback in that sense? Are you also seeing sort of like a movement from annual to something that's more continuous? I don't know.
One of the reasons I escaped the corporate rat race like 7 years ago was to get out of that system of performance reviews and internal bureaucracy and intranets and all of the stuff that corporate life entails. And I think people are fed up, honestly, with the bureaucracy and a lot of the corporate systems. It's really hard as well when you're as a remote worker to navigate your way through a lot of these corporate systems, and they're much too complicated. They're reporting, and they're much too onerous. The expense systems, expense reporting, and all of these systems are just too complicated. So I see a need there for a great flattening of systems and hierarchies and reporting and et cetera, and on, because part of this great resignation we're going to see is because of how just difficult it is to live in corporate America today. I mean, even like getting tech support, getting help from home, it can be a nightmare. Is it your router? Is it your Wi-Fi? Is it your laptop? Is it your video camera? What's wrong? Why isn't this working? And so these tech challenges are really hard for individuals to manage. And we've all seen so many examples of that. So companies need to make it remote working a really integrated, seamless system that's highly secure and isn't a burden to employees. I know when I used to commute, going in the office, you pick up the phone and the tech guy or girl would come over, fix your problem and disappear. And everything flow. That whole dynamic has changed now when it comes to working and work. And companies need to really wake up to, pretty different reality when it comes to all the tools, systems, and best practices that they have for their employees.
Yeah, I totally want to talk about tools and security, but I want to relay a story really quickly while we're talking about performance. Is that I worked with a team that had a really interesting way of giving feedback and doing performance reviews. And I thought it's a great example of actually how these things can change into something more continuous and meaningful. And the system is called Merit Money, and it was developed by Jürgen Appelow of Management 3.0. And the way that it works is that every month, everybody on the team gets 100 points. And the only rule is you're not allowed to keep the points for yourself. You can give them to anybody, but it's transparent. So it's done with a tool. There's many of them out there like Bonusly or You Earned It or some, a spreadsheet could even work. But you give colleagues points based on things that they've done. So I could do, 20 points to Evan for talking with me today, and 10 points to Ashley for setting this all up, and whatever it is that you give. So what this does is it shows on every month what people appreciate about working with you on a team. So it can you kind of get like a continuous feedback, and it's coming from everybody on the team, not just the manager. So the manager is part of it, but everybody's sort of giving this monthly continuous feedback. Now, it's called Merit Money, but I would suggest if you're just starting with a system like this of evaluating every month, that you don't start with money, because every system can be gamed. And when there's money involved, there's an incentive to game the system, of course. So we started with points, but what we ended up with is a system where every month the CFO would set aside a certain amount of profit that we had earned during the month, and that would go into a pool. And then once a month, we would roll the dice in our team meeting. And if we rolled a 6, we would get a payout based on how much merit money we had collected. So, based on how much profit there was. If we didn't roll a 6, the money would then roll over to the next month. So we would roll again the next month, and if we rolled a 6, we'd get a payout. If not, it would roll over again to the next month. So instead of having this annual bonus that you've already spent before you've gotten, because you're going to get this annual bonus, you get this bonus randomly at times throughout the year. You don't know when, you just know that you're going to get it, and it's accumulative based on the number of merit money points that you had earned. And what I liked about this system was that you got a sense of how everybody felt around you, and it encouraged people to work out loud, so that you knew what they were working on, because of course you want to show people what you're working on so that you get points for, maybe somebody would give you points for it. So people were more apt to work out loud, share their work, and talk about what they're doing, so that they could maybe get merit money points. It also encouraged like good behavior with each other. So I just wanted to share, I just love these kind of new systems that are getting put in place that are replacing some of the old archaic sort of dinosaur systems that we had for a long time that you could argue didn't really work or motivate before.
That's great. That's so fun, and I love it. And gamification, having fun, has to be a part of work. The best jobs don't feel like work. I don't feel like I work at all as a solo practitioner in what I do. And the whole world of benefits and pay needs to be rethought. I mean, I've seen employers giving Airbnb vouchers to employees and their families. Say, hey, just get away for a weekend. Just go somewhere different. I've seen time off, much more time off being granted in some companies, some forward-thinking companies, than they have in the past. Say, you've been working really hard. We're taking a day off. We're taking a week off. We're having a week without email, or you're not allowed to open your email after 6 p.m. or respond. And just recognizing that in this new world of remote distributed work, we can't have the same practices that we had before. And so, yeah, I've been delighted to see those kind of things. I love gamification. I actually have my own personal cryptocurrency that I
Awesome.
reward my favorite followers and my most engaged followers with, and they convert that to Bitcoin or Ethereum. But yeah, gamification, having fun. I know that it's a little trite to talk about the Zoom calls and the wine tastings, but those for a lot of people were pretty meaningful things, despite maybe it being overdone to some degree and people getting tired of it. But those sort of team building and collaboration exercises were appreciated. And I see more of that happening, moving forward even as we return to the office in some ways.
Yeah, there are some really wonderful, creative remote gifts or perks that we can use now. Like, time off is a great one since everybody was working and none of us really had real vacations last year, I'm assuming, since everybody's locked down. Some of the perks that I love is you can send a pizza almost anywhere in the world. So I'm always telling people, like, if you see your team's working hard, like, don't be afraid to send a pizza out because one, it's inexpensive. You can send it almost anywhere, and pizza's great for every meal, in my opinion. Like breakfast, lunch, dinner. It sort of suits the moment for wherever it is. So I just love that, and but there's like flowers and monthly magazine subscriptions and a whole bunch of things now that we should think about more than just pay. I think people want more freedom than pay, but there's some creative ways of saying thank you and showing appreciation.
Yeah, a lot of people are taking pay cuts, and they're doing it. They're scaling down. The data shows people are saving more. They're paying off credit cards. Many people, sadly, don't have a choice about downsizing, but many do, and they're downsizing purposely and consuming less. And they want a different lifestyle or work life balance. And so companies, employers need to cater to those different needs.
So we've talked a lot about the challenges, but I want to move a little bit into like what is the benefit that hybrid brings besides freedom? Do you see more benefits in terms of like innovation or working together that hybrid brings, or is it just this is where we're at, we've got to deal with it? What are some of the benefits you
Yeah,
see?
I think for me, it's just freedom and complete flexibility. I mean, I love not just working from home. I love working from anywhere. I love visiting a new place, and spending a week working from somewhere I've never been. We think about digital nomads. Well, there are a lot of folks who have rented vans or rented RVs and hit the road and taken their work on the road to meet clients, to collaborate, to travel. And so this new world of work is really working from anywhere. And there's a whole class of mainly younger workers who are taking advantage of this new flexibility to integrate travel with work, with geography and lifestyle and other things. And so the technology now, whether it's wireless and 5G and security and mobile computing, means you can really take that work anywhere. And I think that's really appealing to a lot of folks, in sort of Gen Z and millennials who aren't excited about doing what their parents did for for 20 or 30 years in corporate America. So I really love that. And for people like myself, it means traveling the world. I mean, before the pandemic, I would go to Singapore, I'd work in Dubai, I'd integrate vacations with work trips, and my business professional life was completely integrated with my personal life. And it was really a pleasure. And I think people want to get back to that kind of work life integration.
I actually, the reason why I started working remotely is I was working for a guy in Los Angeles. I say a guy, he was much more than just a guy, though. He's like really like a mentor, but a guy in Los Angeles who was building a tool, a project management tool. This was 20 years ago. He was building an online project management tool because he didn't want to die. And he thought that longevity scientists weren't working together enough and sharing their data. So he built this tool so that these scientists could get together and solve this problem of aging. And my mind was like, whoa, like mind blown, like what the heck? And then I thought, well, what else could we do if we got the right people working together? And so I started working with him on this tool. I was doing tech support at the time and just like research on what other project management tools were out there. And then like after a year of working with him and his team, my favorite band, actually, who happens to be from the Netherlands, which is why I'm here, long story on that. But my favorite band called and said, we need a tour manager and merchandiser to go on the road with us. We'd love to have you do that. And this is my favorite band since I was 13 years old. So I say to my boss, I say, listen, I've got this opportunity. This is my dream job, but this is my favorite band since I was a kid. And he said, here's a mobile router. And at the time, it was like a mobile router that you could suction cup to the window. So here's a mobile
Oh yeah.
router. Like, have a really good time and make sure you get your work done. So for years, I actually worked from a van during the day with my team using this online project management tool and a mobile router stuck to the window. And then at night, I was tour manager and merchandiser for various bands, and I traveled around the world doing this. And I thought to myself, I wish this for everybody. Like the fact that I can have my dream job and still work on a day-to-day basis with my team, and then at night be a rock star. Like I wish this experience for everybody, whatever that rock star moment is for people. So I think that this way of working really opens up a whole new way of designing our lifestyles, which is pretty profound.
Yeah, that little mobile router that's on the window of the van you had is now in your smartphone. And
Right.
I run my business, basically it's a high six figures business from my smartphone, whether it's talking to my virtual staff or messaging or creating content or invoicing or capturing content or doing video or doing Zoom calls. Literally you can run a business now from your phone. And so mobility is such an integral part to our lives now. We want that freedom and flexibility, and the technology now is delivering. So it's just amazing.
So now we have to dive into security, because as we talk about like people running off to join the circus or bands or whatever it is that they're doing, like how do we make sure that because it's a serious issue, how do we make sure that we are keeping the data that we're working with secure, that we're following proper security protocols for companies? I mean, I can just imagine healthcare, banks, anything to do with finance sensitive company information. I know very little about security except for I know it's possible. So, what advice do you give for companies out there on this?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, the pandemic has seen an unprecedented rise in cyber attacks and data breaches, in ransomware attacks we're seeing on the news literally every day. And so many of us are vulnerable, and companies in particular are big, ripe, juicy targets for these bad actors. And so it's really down to the company and having just really like best practices, having educating their employees on best practices, auditing their networks, and building a multi-layered cybersecurity architecture that protects and encrypts data end to end. And it's really challenging. It's really expensive to hire these cybersecurity pros, and the tools and the devices to secure the network are also expensive. But sadly, if you're a company, you have to make these really necessary investments. Otherwise, you're going to end up on the front page of the New York Times, as we've seen sadly with so many multinational companies. So it's kind of the best and worst of times with all the great technology that we have, from endpoints to home video to broadband, gigabit broadband to mobile computing. It's created this attack surface, this landscape of opportunities for hackers to kind of steal your data, steal your money, take over your systems and your computers, and it's terrifying. So like everything else, we see the tremendous upside and the downside in really stark view. And there are companies like Citrix who are leading the way in innovation around securing that enterprise environment. The good news is that companies who have that sort of leadership at the CISO, the chief security officer, on and downwards, are able to really protect themselves and their employees. The problem is there are so many companies that don't have that kind of security leadership in place, and these security folks are really hard to find, and they're very expensive people to hire. And so it's a real dilemma for enterprises and even small businesses, is how to secure your employees and your business.
I just recently asked one of my clients that's a large government lab being run in the Southwest, and I said, "What's your tip for security?" And the guy said, "If you're at the store and you see two routers, for example, like a €50 router and a $200 router, buy the $200 router. You may not understand the difference, but I promise that there is a difference in terms of security and like things that you can do. And so this is not to say buy the most expensive, but he is saying like don't buy the cheapest stuff when you're talking about security. Like
Yeah.
really
And
invest.
ideally, if you're an employer, you're going to get your employees the router. You're going to manage it for them. You're going to audit their network, and you're really going to need to help your employees stay safe when they're working from home or working on the road. And too many companies are kind of like, well, that's kind of your problem to set up your home network, and that's really where part of the challenge is today.
Indeed, it's the same guy at this lab was saying that, they have a bunch of really smart people, rocket scientists and all kinds of people that are working there. When they did the evaluation of their home networks, they found some very serious security issues that needed to be dealt with, even though they'd all been told what to do. It was good that they did the checking.
Yeah, and that's on one side. The other side is this ransomware epidemic is coming from people clicking emails. I mean,
Still,
it's
the
it's it's
Nigerian
something.
princes are still out there emailing us.
It's just terrible, and so they're just it comes down to the people, the best practices, and educating employees on how to be more secure. And far too few companies are really doing that education well.
Yeah, I can. It's a hard topic to tackle, so I can imagine.
It
Do
is.
you
So, what
have?
about you? What's next on your agenda the next few months? Are you going to be traveling more, working with more companies on the road, more consulting? What's life looking like for you?
Well, in the immediate future, I need to take a vacation. I need to I need to go spend some time in a tent somewhere and just sleeping outside. Because for me, 2020 exploded, of course. Like we're a training company and we were like training right along. And then when the pandemic hit, like I actually had my web host provider call me and say, you're getting so much traffic to your website that I just wanted to call and make sure that you understand what's happening because we have to charge you a lot more now that with all this traffic. So I actually got called by my web hosting provider saying like, hey, what's going on? And I told him like this makes sense because of the kind of work I do. So it was an enormous, and then it was just an enormous increase. And then my husband and I, they were saying like, don't go on vacation until after the summer season because in Europe everybody takes July and August off. I don't know
Of course, I'm
how
wondering what you're doing here, to be honest.
I'm American at heart. I'm American at heart.
Okay, yes, yes.
So we waited for July and August to be over. We took care of everybody's cats while they were away and watered their plants. And then the lockdowns happened shortly after everybody got back from vacation. So we didn't get a vacation. So I'm going to take some time, some well needed time off in the immediate future. But the thing that I'm working on most is really figuring out how to train people in hybrid collaboration. And then the other side topic to this that I want to get into with you also is the whole idea of asynchronous communication and moving because the we have to think of remote as a new medium of work, right? Like it's we can't take what we did in person and do the same thing online because what it results in is endless video calls. That's what we've noticed. We have to change the way that we're communicating with each other. So my big mission for the next year is really to help people understand how to improve their workflows and how to increase the asynchronous number of, actually let me say this differently, how to decrease the number of meetings that people need and improve the ones that they're having through better workflows and asynchronous communication practices.
Oh, that's such a great idea. And people are so poorly educated on even things like email practices. We kind of take it for granted, but that's the kind of oldest form of asynchronous. But also the messaging tools are very effective. All my collaborators and my team use Slack, and we love it. But even messaging, there's a there's a is often misused and not used correctly. So there's the tools, and then there's the whole psychology of how and when and why to message and how to manage that sort of flow in the business. So what a great topic.
I've been really heavily influenced by Cal Newport's latest book, A World Without Email, in which in that book, he mentions that we check our inboxes on average about once every 6 minutes and our instant messaging tools about once a minute. And he calls this way of working the hyperactive hive mind. And that in order to get information to and from each other, that we're constantly swarming in our inbox and our instant messaging systems. And that swarming is what partially what's exhausting us, because we're constantly tied to this like need to get information to and from people, but there's no time. I mean, we're knowledge workers. Most people working in this field that are able to work remotely are knowledge workers. And with knowledge work, all knowledge work has a workflow, and that workflow is not emailing each other back and forth all the time every day. So this concept of how to improve our workflows and going more asynchronous, I got really excited when Cal started talking about this, because I thought, yes, this is the way forward, in my opinion, for remote work, because these endless online meetings, it's not sustainable. I don't feel, and it's not healthy for the human brain.
Right. Such a great topic. Well, it's been really wonderful chatting with you. I think we've shared so much. I look forward to continuing this discussion, because it's like it's an endless topic of conversation that only becomes more important over time, not less important. So, yeah, thanks so much for chatting, and look forward to doing it again soon.
Thanks, Evan. It has been a real pleasure and an honor to meet and speak with you today. Thanks so much.
Oh, likewise. Thanks so much.